Mark Carney just had what he calls a good conversation with Donald Trump, and the results are exactly what critics feared. Despite the diplomatic pleasantries and behind-the-scenes phone calls, Canadian families and businesses are still getting hammered by American tariffs, with no relief in sight. And here's the kicker. Carney's own admission suggests this trade nightmare could drag on indefinitely. So what exactly happened in this Monday night conversation? And why is Canada's strategy of goodwill gestures and diplomatic outreach falling flat when it matters most? To understand how we got here, we need to rewind to the moment when Canada thought it could outsmart Trump's trade war. When Trump imposed his sweeping tariffs earlier this year, Canada responded with what seemed like a smart play: retaliatory tariffs on $60 billion worth of American goods. It was a classic tit-for-tat strategy designed to pressure the U.S. into backing down. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of escalating the fight, Carney blinked first. This week, Canada quietly lifted most of those counter tariffs as what officials called a goodwill gesture. The timing wasn't coincidental. It happened on the same day Carney spoke with Trump. The message was clear: Canada was willing to de-escalate if Trump would do the same. The situation becomes even more concerning when you consider Trump's unwavering stance on tariffs. Just this week, he's preparing to defend his global tariff regime before the Supreme Court, maintaining that these trade barriers are absolutely essential. His argument remains consistent. He believes America needs these tariffs to protect its economic interests, and he's shown no signs of backing down. This gives us a clear window into how Trump and his administration operate and how to respond to American trade pressure.
Today, Donald Trump showed no signs of reciprocating. The U.S. president is preparing to defend his global tariff regime before the Supreme Court.
Because without the tariffs, this country is in serious trouble.
Canadian officials are scrambling to defend this decision.
Asserted today that despite dropping retaliatory tariffs, Prime Minister Mark Carney hasn't put his elbows down.
There's no capitulation. Let's be clear. Zero. Never. That's not happening. We're trying to match exactly what the Americans have done.
And trade talks are...
Cabinet ministers are insisting there's been no capitulation, with one minister emphatically stating that backing down is simply not happening. They claim they're trying to match exactly what the Americans have done, maintaining that trade talks are ongoing and productive. But their defensive tone tells a different story, one where Canada is struggling to justify removing its leverage without getting anything concrete in return. After what Carney described as speaking at length on a wide range of issues, including on trade, but geopolitical, other issues, labor issues, the result was essentially nothing. Carney's own words reveal the harsh reality facing Canadian workers and businesses. When asked about immediate relief, he was brutally honest. Don't expect immediate white smoke on one of these strategic sectors. Translation: the steel workers, aluminum producers, and other major Canadian industries that are bleeding jobs and revenue shouldn't hold their breath for help. This isn't just about trade numbers on a spreadsheet, it's about real families facing real economic pain while their government engages in what increasingly looks like wishful thinking. What makes this situation even more frustrating is how the conversation was handled. Typically, when world leaders speak, the Prime Minister's office releases what are called readouts, summaries of what was discussed. But Carney's Monday conversation with Trump? Radio silence until reporters started asking questions. Only then did the PMO scramble to explain that the Prime Minister has always been clear that he and the President are in close and frequent communication. If these conversations are so routine and productive, why the secrecy? The political implications are staggering. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, who will face off against Carney in the House for the first time this fall, isn't pulling punches. He's calling this yet another capitulation and climbed down by Mark Carney. And frankly, it's hard to argue with that assessment when you look at the scorecard. Canada dropped its retaliatory tariffs. Trump kept his tariffs in place. Canada got a phone call and vague promises of future discussions. But the real story here isn't just about this one conversation. It's about a fundamental misreading of how Donald Trump operates. Carney's approach seems to be based on the assumption that goodwill gestures and diplomatic courtesy will somehow move Trump to reciprocate. But Trump's entire political brand is built on the idea that America wins when other countries lose. He's not looking for win-win solutions, he's looking for American victories. Let's talk about what Canada actually gave up this week. The retaliatory tariffs weren't just symbolic, they were generating real revenue and putting real pressure on American businesses and consumers. Canadian duties on products like oranges, alcohol, clothing, shoes, motorcycles, and cosmetics were making American goods more expensive in Canada. That created constituencies in the United States who had an interest in resolving the trade dispute. By removing those tariffs, Canada eliminated one of its few sources of leverage. What did Canada get in return? According to Carney, Trump reaffirmed that Canadian exports covered by CUSMA wouldn't face additional tariffs. But here's the thing, those protections were already in place under the existing trade agreement. Trump didn't give Canada anything new, he just promised not to break existing commitments. It's like your neighbor promising not to steal your car and expecting you to thank them for their generosity. The timing of this capitulation is particularly problematic because it comes just as the CUSMA review process is heating up. The trade agreement is up for review in 2026, and early positioning matters enormously. By showing weakness now, Canada may have undermined its negotiating position for the much more important discussions to come. Trump's team is watching how Canada responds to pressure, and what they're seeing is a country that folds quickly when faced with economic pain. Carney's defenders will argue that maintaining 85% tariff-free trade with the United States is actually a victory. They'll point out that Canada's average tariff rate of 5.6% is lower than what other countries face. But this misses the bigger picture. Those remaining tariffs are hitting Canada's most important industries: steel, aluminum, automobiles, copper, lumber, and energy. These aren't peripheral sectors, they're the backbone of Canada's industrial economy. The steel industry alone supports tens of thousands of jobs across Canada. When American tariffs make Canadian steel less competitive, it doesn't just hurt steel companies. It ripples through the entire supply chain. Construction companies, manufacturers, and infrastructure projects all feel the impact. The same is true for aluminum, where Canada is a global leader, and lumber, where entire communities depend on forestry jobs. What's particularly galling is how this contradicts Carney's own campaign rhetoric. During the election, he positioned himself as the tough negotiator who would put elbows up against Trump's aggression. He criticized the previous government for being too accommodating to American demands. But now that he's in power, his strategy seems to be hope and pray that Trump will suddenly develop a sense of fairness and reciprocity. The broader context makes this even more concerning. Trump isn't just targeting Canada with tariffs, he's reshaping global trade relationships to benefit American industries at everyone else's expense. China, Mexico, and European allies are all facing similar pressure. But unlike Canada, many of these countries are fighting back with sustained pressure campaigns and strategic alliances. Canada, meanwhile, is essentially negotiating with itself, making concessions in hopes of getting concessions in return. Carney's team is trying to spin this as strategic patience, arguing that the real negotiations will happen during the formal CUSMA review. But this fundamentally misunderstands how Trump operates. He doesn't reward patience and goodwill. He interprets them as weakness. Every concession Canada makes without getting something concrete in return just encourages Trump to ask for more. The human cost of this strategy is becoming increasingly clear. Small businesses across Canada are struggling with higher costs and supply chain disruptions. The Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses released a survey showing that nearly 20% of small businesses are at risk of shutting down within 6 months due to these pressures. These aren't abstract economic statistics. They're real people losing their livelihoods while their government plays diplomatic games. What makes this particularly frustrating is that Canada does have leverage if it chooses to use it. The United States depends on Canadian energy, minerals, and agricultural products. Canadian supply chains are deeply integrated with American manufacturing. A sustained campaign of targeted retaliation could create real costs for American businesses and consumers. But that would require a willingness to accept short-term pain for long-term gain, something Carney's government seems unwilling to do. The political ramifications are already becoming clear. Poilievre is hammering Carney for weakness, and the attacks are landing because they reflect a deeper truth about the liberal approach to Trump. Instead of standing firm on principle, they're constantly looking for ways to accommodate American demands while hoping for the best. It's a strategy that might work with a normal president, but Trump isn't normal. Looking ahead, the situation is likely to get worse before it gets better. Trump has made it clear that he sees trade relationships as zero-sum competitions where America must win. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick has stated that Trump is absolutely going to renegotiate USMCA. This isn't a president looking for minor adjustments to an existing deal. This is someone planning a complete overhaul of North American trade relationships. The most troubling aspect of Carney's approach is how it signals to Trump that pressure works. Every time Canada makes a concession without getting something concrete in return, it encourages more aggressive demands. Trump's team is taking notes, and what they're learning is that Canada will eventually fold if the pressure is sustained long enough. Michael Sabia, Carney's clerk of the Privy Council, is currently in Washington meeting with American counterparts. But based on the pattern we've seen so far, these meetings are likely to involve more Canadian concessions in exchange for vague American promises of future consideration. It's a diplomatic approach that might have worked in a different era, but it's poorly suited to dealing with Trump's transactional worldview. The broader question is whether Canada is prepared for the reality of a prolonged trade war with its largest trading partner. Trump isn't going away, and his approach to international relationships isn't going to suddenly become more reasonable. If Canada wants to protect its economic interests, it needs to be prepared for a sustained fight, not a series of goodwill gestures that go unreciprocated. The irony is that Carney's good conversation with Trump may have actually made the situation worse. By removing Canada's retaliatory tariffs without getting anything concrete in return, Canada has essentially rewarded Trump's aggressive approach. It sent the message that Canada will back down under pressure, which only encourages more pressure. As Canadian families and businesses continue to bear the cost of this trade dispute, they deserve leadership that will fight for their interests, not leadership that hopes diplomatic niceties will somehow change Trump's fundamental approach to trade relationships. Carney's Monday conversation with Trump was supposed to be a breakthrough. Instead, it looks like another example of a Canadian government that talks tough during elections, but folds when it actually comes time to stand up to American pressure. The question now is whether Carney will learn from this mistake or continue down the path of unilateral concessions. Because if the past week is any indication, Trump's strategy of sustained pressure is working exactly as intended, and Canada's strategy of goodwill gestures is failing exactly as critics predicted.